All right, let's talk about something that happens in so many great organizations, but it often doesn't even have a name. We're talking about the quiet killer of good intentions. The thing that slowly, almost silently, drains the life out of a team from the inside.
So, does this sound familiar to you? You started out with this big vision, tons of energy. You were going to change things. But now, your day-to-day is just a constant scramble of putting out fires, sitting in meetings that go nowhere, and just trying to stay afloat. You're not really leading anymore, you're just reacting.
And if that feeling hits home, I bet these symptoms do too. Priorities that seem to shift with the wind. Communication that's, well, kind of fuzzy and passive. You find yourself dodging those tough conversations you know you need to have. The whole vibe is just settling for good enough. You have meetings, sure, but then nothing actually changes. And you can just feel that trust on the team starting to wear thin.
This quote just nails it. The danger of this whole thing is that it isn't a sudden crisis. It's not a big, loud explosion. It's a slow leak. It's a tiny compromise here, a postponed decision there. It's so subtle that you hardly even notice it's happening, until you're standing in a puddle and the damage is done.
And that brings us to the core idea here. You aren't necessarily failing in some catastrophic way. You're not totally lost. You're drifting. And that's the name for this slow fade, from being an intentional, proactive leader to just being a reactive survivor.
So let's be super clear on what we mean by leadership drift. It's the slow, steady erosion of purpose, values, and a clear sense of direction. And here's the really important part. This is not about blaming you or any single person. It's not some personal flaw. It's a systemic breakdown. It's a pattern that shows up when the very structures that are supposed to support clear leadership start to get weak.
Okay, so if you want to stop drift, you've got to understand what causes it in the first place, right? So let's break down the 8 main things that feed this slow decay. Because once you can put a name to them, you can start to fight back.
Take a look at this. This is basically the anatomy of drift. And notice how all these causes are connected. Each one can feed into the next, creating this vicious cycle that just keeps pulling an organization further and further off course. Let's walk through each one.
First up, direction deficit. This is when the why gets lost. You know, without that clear, compelling vision, that North Star, teams just start to splinter. People might be working really hard, but they're working on the wrong things, and the whole organization just kind of stalls.
Next, this is a big one, communication breakdowns. We've all been there. Vague emails, confusing instructions, not enough transparency. All of it creates confusion, and that confusion breeds distrust. When people don't know what's going on, they can't pull in the same direction, and all that forward momentum just grinds to a halt.
Then you've got feedback failure. This is like trying to navigate a ship without a compass or a map. When leaders stop paying attention to how things are actually going, or they ignore input from the people on the front lines, or they wait too long to make adjustments, small problems have a way of turning into huge ones.
And that flows right into team neglect. This is what happens when people feel like their voices don't matter, when their personal growth is totally ignored, and when those little team conflicts are just left to simmer. What's the result? Well, morale takes a nosedive, people check out, and your best talent starts polishing up their resumes.
Weak accountability. This creates the perfect environment for mediocrity to thrive. I mean, if no one's really sure who owns what, or the rules seem to apply to some people but not others, follow-through just vanishes. It sends a pretty clear message that doing great work is optional.
The integrity gap is so corrosive. This is that gap between what the company says it values and what it actually does and rewards. When your actions don't line up with your words, you lose all your credibility. Trust just collapses, and cynicism takes its place. You know, sometimes drift isn't about a lack of will, it's about a lack of capacity. If your people don't have the resources, the tools, or simply the time they need to do their jobs well, then even the most brilliant strategy is doomed to fail. All you get is burnout and bottlenecks. And finally, we have growth gaps. Think about it. When people feel like they're stagnating, when they're not learning anything new, and when their hard work seems to go completely unnoticed, their motivation just tanks. Why would you go the extra mile if it feels like nobody cares and you're not going anywhere?
So those are the causes. Now let's talk about the consequences, the real-world cost. Because letting drift happen isn't a neutral act. It costs you dearly. It costs you the very things that make an organization great. It costs you your edge.
The very first thing you lose is clarity. Your team just isn't sure what's important anymore. Is it
This new project or the one from last week? When everything is a priority, then nothing is. So people end up being busy, sure, but they're not being productive because all their effort is scattered.
The second thing you lose is your credibility. When you let that integrity gap grow, when you don't hold people accountable, when your communication is all over the place, you are actively burning through the trust that your team has in you. And without trust, you can't really lead. And what you ultimately lose, the biggest cost of all, is your culture. All that positive energy, the optimism, that sense of being in it together, it just fades away. And it gets replaced by cynicism, disengagement, and a culture where everyone is just trying to cover their own backs. That is a tough, tough hole to dig out of. Okay, we've defined the problem, we've named the causes, and we've talked about the high cost. Now for the good news. You can absolutely choose to lead again. But here's the thing you have to get. Drift doesn't fix itself. It doesn't go away by accident. It only ends when you take deliberate, structured action.
This slide really shows the transformation we're talking about. On the left, you've got that state of drift. Unfocused, hesitant, always reactive. But by tackling those root causes we talked about, you can move to the state on the right, totally clear on what matters, confident in your own voice, and back in control of the standards for yourself and your team.
Let's just be real for a second. Experiencing leadership drift is incredibly common. It happens to even the best leaders in organizations. It's like a natural force of entropy. But seeing it, recognizing it, and then choosing to do nothing about it, that's optional. That is a choice.
And this quote just brings it all home, doesn't it? Real leadership was never about the title on your door or your position on an org chart. It's about the standard you hold, the standard for your work, for your team, and for yourself. Drift is just what happens when we let that standard slip. So I'll leave you with this question to take away. Be really honest with yourself. Where have you, in your team, in your projects, in your own career, where have you stopped actively leading and started just coasting? Because answering that question, really answering it, is the first step to grabbing the wheel again.